there are efficient things. I know what it is.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, why only?
By rail, also how it works. Usually it's what do you think? Option two.
Yeah, first
You mean to view transmission line? There's a lot of environmental also. But by rail it's also food, yeah. Because the transmission lines can be an option, but they are like underground and very to avoid those losses of energy. There's a lot of this options. You gotta but what is better to use energy or what is less important? Which one is better?
Okay, maybe 30 seconds more.
For the first one.
so that's
Yeah, and you have the transmission that you need a lot of labor in that sense. It's just trying to control all the efficiency of the system, but not working labor. But I don't know. I think option
Okay, so let's take a quick poll. How many people feel like option one makes the most sense? So actually shipping it by rail, what they're doing already, generating electricity in Texas for the demand center. How many people? Okay, and then how many people say option two? I'd say we're almost 50-50 in terms of the split. So first of all, I applaud you for jumping right into the conversation and not coming back to me and saying, well, I'm not a power engineer or a civil engineer looking at rail systems or a mechanical engineer looking at the power plants. That you're actually willing to entertain this issue, because I think a lot of people do push back. And what I found when I was doing this research was, I presented it at power engineering conferences as well as in sort of transportation systems. And how little each of those communities knew about the infrastructure that was right next to theirs. And so a rail system expert didn't really know very much about the power system and vice versa. And that happens a lot. But when you're doing energy systems analysis, you need to sort of step out of your comfort zone a lot of times. And you need to look at this full system approach. And you need to look for experts that can help you to make sure you're representing the systems well. But there's very few people that can actually connect the mining to the actual power generation, the transmission system, and compare that to a rail system as well. But when we do energy systems analysis, a lot of times we have to do that. And we then need to rely on people that are experts in individual disciplines to help pull that together. So what types of things were you discussing in terms of what the issues were and why you thought that one was better than the other? Yeah?
For using the train method where you ship the coal down, I assume you need to create additional infrastructure with the transmission lines for the other option. So there would be existing rail lines for A, and you have to create new infrastructure for B. So that was one consideration. Also, the energy that would be lost in transmitting the electricity through the transmission lines was another consideration.
Okay.
We thought about.
Okay, great. Good. Yep.
Yeah, I was quite similar to that one. We were thinking that we were thinking more long term, perhaps it would be worthwhile to put in the new infrastructure with the transmission lines, because you'd be able to, I guess, pay off a lot of the costs of setting it up. But if like but for short term, it would be better to use the rail because you already have the infrastructure that's there.
Okay.
As
So,
well
you-
as,
so both of you are assuming that the rail infrastructure is already there and that it's not congested, right?
Yeah.
That you can add more trains to it and it would be fine. So that's an assumption that it would need to be tested, right? Yep. Other ideas?
Oh, I was just, if it hasn't been built, the infrastructure is the NIMBY, like for consultation with the public. No one wants substate, because it's not just transmission lines and those towers, like it's substations that you need to build, and no one wants those in their backyard, so.
Right.
And on either of this option, I was assuming as well that the rail system was existing, because they were using it today,
Right.
but that the transmission lines and the substations were not there, so.
Yeah, no, I think that the NIMBY issue, I think it's almost impossible to build any new infrastructure anywhere, right? But that there are differences between the infrastructure, right? So one of the things is that the transmission line, a lot of times they'll actually build it on, say, grazing land, and the cows can still graze in that area. They just have a big metal structure that doesn't seem to bother the cows all that much, right? But if you have it next to a housing development, it actually reduces the value of the house. And a lot of that is the electromagnetic forces that people believe might have a health implication. And so that literature is sort of 50-50. Half of them say that it does have an effect, and half of it says that it doesn't. So that's still a controversial area, but regardless of that, it reduces value of houses. And so even if you don't believe that it has an effect, you have to factor it into a housing decision, right? So there's different types. Whereas the rail system, once you build that infrastructure, you can't do anything on that line, right? For safety issues, you have to dedicate that space to the rail system, and you have to build the safety mechanisms to make sure that gets operated. So there's problems with citing any new infrastructure, but different problems depending on which one you're looking at. Yep.
So the energy lost in transmission of electricity for such a long distance?
Yep.
So that can be a huge issue as well?
Yeah, and so a lot of people sort of, I got a lot of opposition to the power engineers saying, well, you would operate the system such that you would get very little line losses, especially if you were doing the HVDC, you would have very little. But when you actually look at how they load the lines in actual operation, a 1,000 mile line, which is with an HVDC system that was at about 408 kV grading, you would get about 7% line loss at loading this amount of power. So I was assuming that it was a 1,000 megawatt power line, and a 7% line loss is pretty significant. But something no one has brought up yet is, what about the energy consumed by the rail systems? Is that something that somebody considered? Yeah. And so what the differences are between the energy that's used to transport the coal by rail versus the energy that's used to transport it through the transmission lines. Both of those things would be issues, right? Any other issues? Yeah.
Seems like it's pretty clear economically which would make sense, and then environmentally which would make sense. It seems that if you don't consider the environmental side of it, it makes the most sense to transport by rail.
Okay. And then environmentally?
To transport by the power lines.
Okay. So I don't know whether that's completely clear, because we had about a